The fundamental argument for expanding the sphere of ethics to non-human animals is that the boundary of our species is not itself a morally crucial distinction. We're used to situations in the past where people have drawn boundaries around groups of beings that we can see was really for their own convenience and their own ability to exploit others rather than on some real basis. The boundary of the white race, for example, is the most obvious, that was used to justify slavery. And men have also drawn the boundaries around men rather than women in some instances. Now, when we look at the boundary of species, again, it's our species justifying our exploitation and often literally enslavement of non-human animals. And we need to ask, why is that boundary of species so important? And when we do ask that question, the usual answers don't really work. People may say, well, we are more rational, or we are self-aware, or we can use language, as I'm now using it. But it's not true that all members of the species Homo sapien are more rational or more able to use language, more self-aware than some non-human animals. None of us were when we were infants, for example. And some, unfortunately, will never have those abilities. So if we look more critically at the use of that boundary, we can see the purposes that it served. And I think we can see that what really matters is whether beings can experience a life that is good for them. That is, a happy or fulfilling or rewarding life, a life free of pain, a life with pleasure. And that clearly applies to a very large range of non-human animals. They're capable of feeling pain as we are. And I would argue that the fact that they are not members of the species Homo sapien does not in any way make their pain less important ethically than the pain of a member of our species. Pain is pain, and it's equally bad whichever being suffers it. What we ought to be looking at is how severe is the pain, how long does the pain last, and we should give equal consideration to the similar pains of all beings, irrespective of their race, their sex, their nationality, and their species. It's always hard to say to what extent my own work has played a role in improving the situation of non-human animals, because there's been a large movement since the 1970s working for those objectives, and to some extent even before that. But the publication of my book Animal Liberation in 1975 has been regarded as being a trigger for the modern animal rights movement. Some people have referred to it as the Bible of the animal rights movement. And I know that it has brought more people into the movement, because very often when I speak somewhere publicly, people come up with a copy of the book and say, this changed my life, I stopped eating animals, or I joined the animal movement. So I know that it's contributed. And collectively, the work that I've done and the work that millions of other people have done has started to make a difference in the way animals are treated. A lot of the practices that I described in the first edition of Animal Liberation, for example, keeping hens in wire cages so small that they can't even stretch their wings, or keeping veal calves or pigs in stalls that were too narrow for them to turn around or walk more than a single step. Those practices are now illegal across the entire European Union and in some parts of the United States, like California, and in some other countries as well. So we have been making progress in that respect. Also in the area of the use of animals in experimentation, there are somewhat more control over that. Again, the European Union has been a leader. You're not allowed to test cosmetics on animals, for example, in the European Union. So there's been significant progress, but there's also still a very long way to go. The biggest challenge that we have to improve animal welfare is to do something about the commercial raising and killing of animals for food, because that is by far the largest area of human abuse of animals. If we just talk about vertebrate animals on land, we're talking about something like 70 to 80 billion animals produced each year. And if we include fish as well, that would add another 120 billion to the total tally. So this is a huge area of animal suffering. Very often there's really only the concern to produce the animals as cheaply as possible, and little or no concern for the well-being of the animals. So I really think we need to try to stop this. We need to try to get people to shift to plant-based foods, or alternatively we need to develop meat, animal products that we produce at the cellular level. So molecularly you're talking about meat, but no animal has suffered. And the other factor that's important here is that the greenhouse gas emissions of the meat industry are very significant. And if we can replace that meat with plant-based foods or with cellular meat, we will dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and give ourselves more time to avoid that tipping point where the climate of the entire planet is irreparably damaged for centuries to come.